Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Marc Isix.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How you doing today, Nick?
I'm doing okay. It's been a long week. How you doing?
It has been a long week. Actually, this is our first 5-day week that we've had this year. So it's been a month, but yet this is the first full week, and I definitely feel it. Not that I should be complaining, but it definitely, it definitely hits you after the fifth day. That's for sure.
And then, of course, being concerned about the impending hurricane doesn't help matters.
That's true. Although I think we're going to luck out and not get the full brunt of it, but it's definitely going to bring a lot of rain, and it's going to soak us pretty good. And I'll be probably standing in it tomorrow at the football field while our guys are sloshing around.
Yes. Well, winning as you guys usually do.
Well, one can only hope.
All right, but it was obviously a big day in education today.
It was a huge day in education today. Perhaps a day that will live in infamy, but perhaps we've been living in infamy all along. Would you like to share with our listeners what they perhaps will learn very shortly?
Sure, yeah. Well, middle of the day today, I got an update that our Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, was stepping down and moving back to his home of Chicago.
Which leaves President Obama without a basketball player on his pickup team.
Yes, he did
Apparently,
make reference to that during the press conference this afternoon.
did he really?
Yes, he
I didn't.
did.
I didn't catch the press
He
conference.
did. He kind of he mocked Arnie Duncan for not being able to jump very high and not being too fast, but said he definitely has skills.
He didn't say white men can't jump, though,
No,
did
no,
he?
no, he did not use that. And for those if people don't know, Arnie Duncan played basketball at Harvard and was a very talented player. I think he played professionally in Australia as well.
One can only wish that he remained a professional basketball player instead of transitioning into the world of education.
Well, yes, I think there are many people who feel the same way, and I'm sure he's a very decent man. Um, it sounds like it was a family decision. It wasn't the job that he really just wanted to go back home to Chicago. But there were a couple of things in the press conference that definitely frustrated me today.
Well, what were some of those things?
I would say, and please feel free to criticize me if you disagree, but one of the comments that was made is that the progress that's been made under Arnie Duncan's leadership, and this was President Obama speaking, that
Hmm.
education takes a long time before you see the fruits of that labor, and
Fair.
and I do think that's a fair point, except for the fact that teachers all over the country are being asked to be evaluated on 1 year of work, and I think that's a bit of an unfair comparison. If you're going to claim that the Secretary of Education, it's going to take years before we see the results, yet teachers are supposed to get kids to improve on a test. Well, I mean, we've talked about this so often, but it was definitely very frustrating to me.
That's a tremendously good point, and it just shows one of the many hypocrisies that exist, and more than a hypocrisy, just maybe a lack of understanding. Perhaps that's the most frustrating part. Hypocrisy, I guess, is everywhere, but you just would hope that the people who are making these kinds of decisions would have a wealth of understanding and a wealth of knowledge and be able to apply it to a situation. And clearly, with in the world of education, I guess that's the world we know best. That understanding is not prevalent to the level that it needs to be, and it's almost as if there's either one of two things. They either live in a fantasy world where whatever they dream up can just work magically, or there's another agenda, and this, our desire to create a very strong and thriving public school education system is not necessarily aligned with what they're trying to accomplish, and they have other agendas that are working in opposition. And I think it's more that than the fact that they don't have an understanding or that they don't know what they're doing. I think they know exactly what they're doing. It just doesn't line up with what we believe and what we know truly in our hearts is best for children and best for the education system.
And I will say that there were so many comments, and he was crying, Arnie Duncan. I mean, there were tears in his eyes, and there were so many wonderful comments about caring about children, worrying about their well-being, inspiring them, motivating them. Everything was said well, but then the legislation doesn't match that. when you hold states, basically hostage to money without using test scores to evaluate teachers, that's a problem. I mean, it's the problem that many people
Right.
point to today. And I think, again, I do think they're decent people. I think they're very decent people. But I also think there's just a disconnect. I mean, I was talking to a colleague the other day who's actually been teaching longer than me. And I've been 22 years in the classroom. There is so much that is different about a junior in high school today than when I started. And I just
Right.
don't know if people who haven't been in the classroom every day can understand that times change, that people change, that their needs change, their personalities. I think kids are equally, if not even more intelligent than they've ever been. But they're different. It's a different job, and it continues to be a different job. And I
Kids have
think,
access to more information
right,
now than they've ever had.
absolutely. And again, I think kids are tremendous today, but it's different. That's all. It's just a different type of job, and it continues to change. And if you've really, and that really transitions to the new Secretary of Education. But if you don't understand what it is to be in the classroom, I think it's very difficult to make policies on that.
It's true. And you could look at his past in Chicago and you look what he's done on the national level. And I just don't feel like he has left us, or his legacy has left us in a better place than we were when he came in. I think we're much more divisive now. I think the introduction of Common Core, while we have on this podcast agreed that that is the right direction, and there are many good qualities of Common Core, the implementation of Common Core, the branding of Common Core has gotten absolutely destroyed, in part, large part, to the ineffective rollout and not having the understanding of the amount of time, or at least not demonstrating an understanding of the amount of time it takes to really implement true change. And you can't just this is not a cigarette boat that can turn on a dime. This is a cruise ship, 10 times the size of the Titanic. You want to turn that thing, it takes a very, very long time before you actually see any results after you turn the wheel. And their impatience in implementing these things and it's reminiscent of like a Stalin 5-year plan. You just want to undo 50 years of, or a period of time where you think we have moved in the wrong direction, and correct it instantaneously or in an unreasonably short period of time. You can't do it. You just can't do it. It's not realistic. And what happens is good people who are well intentioned stop following you. And when you start losing them, then you really lose the cause.
Right. And I would also have to ask, and again, I'm sure he's a very kind, decent, caring person, but if he wants to talk about long-term legacy, well, then how does he feel about his long-term legacy in Chicago? Because every news outlet out there is talking about the violence in the cities of Chicago, the city of Chicago. Well,
Hmm.
where did those kids go to school 5, 10 years ago? These 20-year-olds who are committing all these crimes, they sat in a classroom in the Chicago public school system, of which he was the superintendent.
Right. Or they didn't sit in the
Or
classroom,
they
which
didn't,
is a
right?
problem also.
Right. Not that I'm
And
blame
and
and not that I'm
that's right.
blaming him. I want to make
Right.
sure, of course, but that my point is that it takes a Herculean effort in this country to overhaul education and to understand that the system is so diverse and it is so varied from place to place. And what it ultimately comes down to is a teacher trying to change the direction and educate young people one by one, and with administrators that support it. And all of this legislation, the amount of time, and obviously you spend way more than I do, that we waste on data and numbers and graphs and charts, it's useless. You'd be much better off spending all of that time talking to a young person to help him or her work harder and overcome obstacles in his or her life.
That's right. That's right. But as a result, it's almost become a cottage industry. Now, all the different companies that are producing tests and assessments and programs and response to intervention and everything that starts to pop up, all the alphabet soup that starts to pop up now, it's a cottage industry. And you start to get people who go on the book tour and the speaking circuit, and they're speaking to all of these different things. But what you said is 100% right. At the end of the day, getting to know a student, getting to understand a situation, getting to know a family, that personal touch is going to bear far more fruit than any kind of major overhaul, because they just don't work. Like Race to the Top is a perfect example. You mentioned it before. That amount of money that they dangled in front of the various states to adopt Race to the Top, their application for Race to the Top, was a paltry sum. And it wasn't even over a long period of time. It was going to be basically enough money to sort of start something and not finish it. So the design, the whole way through, the design was just very poor. It demonstrated a lack of understanding of the real depth of the problem, the breadth of the problem, and that's his legacy. And with that, he's tied into Obama's education legacy. It's tied into Chicago's education legacy. It's tied into Rahm Emanuel's education legacy to some degree. And now, of course, we get to the transition into the new Secretary of Education. And the part that makes my blood boil maybe the most is that Arne Duncan's replacement is going to be none other than Dr. John King, who was formerly of New York State Education Department. And I know we've definitely spent some time talking about him.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I forget who I said what to and on which podcast, but look, his story is very inspirational. And every time he comes up in the news, I read about the fact that both of his parents were educators in New York City schools, and they both passed away when he was young, and he was bouncing around. I think he lived with a relative on Long Island, and then he went to a private boarding school. I think it might have been Exeter, and he, by his own admission, had trouble there. But he went to Harvard, graduated from Harvard, has his PhD from, does he have it from Columbia Teachers College? He has, it's a very impressive resume, and he brought that up. He said,
Hmm.
that there are kids just like him all over the place, and I gave him a lot of credit for what he said. He said that if it weren't for young teachers in his life who reached out to him and helped him. He mentioned a social studies teacher, and I forget the other. I think the other was an elementary teacher. So all of that is great. But then I still look at the resume after he got all of his
Hmm.
degrees, and I just don't see anywhere near the experience in the classroom or even in the public school setting to be running the show.
He's talking about how people took the time to listen to him and to help him with his situation. But yet, when he showed up at these town hall meetings and they were genuinely concerned and distraught parents and children, he basically blew them off. You remember those
Yeah, I was
those
at
town
one
hall
of them. I
meetings?
think you were too, right?
No, actually, I wasn't.
Oh,
I
okay. I
wasn't.
was
But
at
I saw
one.
the
Yeah.
video. I saw the video feed from that on YouTube. I think it was, and he was blowing people off left and right and giving them these very kind of canned political responses to the questions. And they were there. I mean, some were there, you know, not to praise him, but to bury him. That's for sure. But other people were there genuinely concerned for their children's well-being and their local schools' well-being, and they basically walked away empty-handed and without even a sympathetic ear.
Well, I have brought this up with my classes on several occasions, and I every time his name comes up in the news, I feel compelled to go back to read the article when he became commissioner because I do not believe that somebody could have put this practice in place. But I checked again today. When he was the principal of a charter school, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think he has a total of about 3 years experience.
It was
Uh,
something like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
he instituted a policy which I'm sure teachers would love. That students are not permitted to talk in the hallway during passing time. And the fact that somebody would think that this would work in our schools all throughout the country, that by telling kids who are sitting in classes all day long that you can't speak in the halls in between classes, that's going to want to motivate kids to learn more, I'm speechless.
Well, I think we had spoken about this previously on a podcast that in one of the videos that had been, I want to say it was NBC had put it on the air when they were running their Education Nation segment. I think it was probably about a year ago, and they'd gone to a charter school. I think it was in Harlem, one of the success schools, and there was this very regimented procedure or protocol when the students were in the classroom, and then they would pick up a pencil at the same time, they'd begin writing at the same time, they would stand at the same time, and they claimed that that kind of order was good for students. I personally don't see that, and in my experience, it doesn't that doesn't bode well. Usually, you don't get really good results when that happens. You wind up getting students who oppose it, and then they become very oppositional, and that becomes very problematic. I think you have to give students parameters, but you have to give them the opportunity to be people and not be treated like things. And when you tell students that they can't talk in the hallway, I think that's just draconian. Makes no sense to me. And I know that they're trying to accomplish certain things in certain schools with certain environments and difficulties, but there has to be some sort of practicality and a respect for the individuals, and that dehumanizes them, if you ask me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So, we transition from one to another, and we'll have to wait and see what the results are going to be.
When he left, his rise was very calculated the whole time, and you could almost see it. And I think we had spoken about it previously as well, but you knew that there's another act to the show, and that we weren't going to hear the last of him, and he was being groomed the whole time, and now we sort of see the final act of how this all plays out. And he was clearly being groomed. He started as the assistant, and then he became the commissioner here, and then he moved to Washington, was the assistant, and now he's the secretary. So, listen, the guy knows he's a political operator. He knows how to rise up. He knows how to get the job. My problem is he just doesn't know how to do the job effectively. And now that he's reached the top, I don't know where else he wants to go from here. So here's his chance to show us what he can do. But given his track record, I don't feel very confident.
Yeah, well, it will be interesting because obviously a presidential election could change a lot of things in a year. So we'll see what he can do in the short amount of time.
That's true too. But
Yeah.
It all depends on who is the nominee and ultimately who is the president.
Of course.
Because there are a lot of states that were signing on to Common Core, and a lot of politicians that have backed Common Core, and now some of them are backing away from Common Core, even though they previously supported it. And it'll be interesting. But more importantly, I think that the state education department of New York and the United States Education Department, they've lost a lot of people. A lot of people have lost faith in them. And it has to do with these tests and just think about the opt-out movement for a second, and how, I don't know how we're ever going to go back to a non-opt-out mindset. When we were going to school, there was never a question about whether or not you're going to take the test, or anything that the state or the school told you had to do, you did. I don't know how we ever go back to a time where people will actually take the tests that are required without pushing back, because people always took the test that the school or the state required, and they may like it, they may not like it, but it was accepted that you take it. But now people are empowered to determine whether or not they think the test is good for their child, and then pull them out. And now that that's happened, I don't know how you unring the bell. And that's just another part of the legacy that both Arne Duncan and John King have left in New York State, Chicago, and the country. I just don't know how you go back, and how we as educators go back to a time where it's just where there's trust in the school and there's trust in the system that the test or the assessment is appropriate. From this point forward, people will just constantly be evaluating from their sofas at home and the kitchen table whether or not a test is appropriate for their child. That's going to be very damaging.
Yeah, it's all going to backfire on them, because when you have middle school tests that really can't be used against the child in any way, you're going to have the opt-outs only grow in number. Then when you have the high school tests, which can be used and are used for graduation, they don't want too many kids to fail anyway, because then that's going to be counterproductive to their goal of increasing graduation rates. So they
Right.
can't win because they create exams in middle school that by design must have kids getting a 1. And
Right.
if you have a test where there's a bell curve and you must have kids getting a 1, that's all one teacher or principal is going to need in a courtroom to show how the evaluation tools are unfair. Because it's designed, because if every teacher hypothetically does everything correct, you still have teachers with students that are getting 1s on the exams.
Right.
And
But
that's not the case in a high school setting where there are plenty of schools that get 99% passing on Regents exams.
out where we are,
Where we
that's
are.
not
Right.
right. That's not uncommon, but that is relatively uncommon in other parts of the state.
But it's possible. It's not possible to get 99%
Right.
on the other ones because of the way it's graded.
The people who get 1s or the people who get 2s, the parents of those students, they're going to constantly now, moving forward, criticize the legitimacy of the test. And
Right.
listen, the tests were never perfect, but they never had to be perfect. They were just good enough to do what they were supposed to do. But now people will continue to question, and as long as there's a large population in getting 1s or low 2s, they will question the validity, or not enough 4s, they will question the validity of the test, no matter what. So how do you, moving forward, this was my point, how do you create a good assessment moving forward that people will come back on board and want their children to take? Because ultimately assessments are a good thing educationally. They do help you determine how far along students are. Are they reaching certain benchmarks? Are there additional services that we can provide for them and supports that we can provide for them? They do have value, but now, because of what John King has done, because of what Arne Duncan has done, because of what the botched implementation of Common Core has done, they have left people in a very strong position, the community and parents and so on, and educators to a great degree, in a very strong position to continually criticize any test that comes forward other than a perfect test. And since there's no such thing as a perfect test, because it's simply a matter of one's opinion, then how do we ever get back to a place where people can uniformly accept the assessments that have been created?
And the only response I have is, will we have a Secretary of Education in the near future who will understand what you just said? Will we have
Do I even
somebody?
understand what I just said?
Will we have somebody that will realize how counterproductive our policies are right now? Because they're not in any way assisting young people to improve their lives.
So ultimately, is John King's goal to get every school to shut down and basically put all those students into charter schools? Is that the magic bullet
I,
that will solve all of the educational
I don't
deficiencies in the
I
country?
don't want to be that cynical. I don't want to be, but
Can I
there
be that
are
cynical?
you can, but there are
Okay, thank
people
you.
in the business world that want all of the money that's available to them that's in education. So there's no question that the movement to privatize education is those forces are working behind the scenes. Maybe we'll have to talk about that at a later podcast.
Yes, maybe we'll entitle it "Reverse Welfare."
So, all right.
But I do want to transition into, here we are a month down the road, and we did a podcast on the first day or first days of school, and here we are a month later, and I guess what I want to talk about is how have things changed now a month in. We started by talking about having optimism and talking about all the wonderful things that we could do and getting on that road to success and prosperity in the classroom. But now it's a month later, and reality sets in. The honeymoon is starting to end. Progress reports are starting to come out if they haven't already, and things start to change. So, if we were speaking to a first year teacher, what kind of changes would you tell him or her that he or she should expect to see now that the first progress reports are out?
I think I think that students are now in a routine. You know, teachers are in the routine a little bit earlier usually, but now students I think feel comfortable or not in their daily schedule, and they've figured out what the expectations are in each of their classes. And I think the students who are doing well and are responding to what's going on in the classroom, you just want to keep building on that and challenging students and asking them to go above and beyond. But I think this is the time where a teacher can also identify which kids might be struggling. And I know, at least on the first progress report, I really try, well, not try, I make sure that the comments are positive in the beginning. There's no need after 3 or 4 weeks to bury a kid. If there is something that's that alarming, I think it's better to do that through a phone call, through the guidance counselor, in some other measure. I think it's good, the first time you ever make an evaluation of the student, I think it's nice to be somewhat positive.
So you're saying that you shouldn't use possible course failure at this point.
Yeah, that would be a start. That would be a start. Needs to participate more, I think, is good, because I don't think that's negative. I think we want the student to feel more comfortable as the year goes on. I don't consider that one too negative.
So how optimistic should you be on that first progress report? Because let's be honest, it's been a month. You're a pretty good judge of character. You've seen them now for a bunch of sessions. You have a sense of where they are, at least for right now. So how optimistic should you be when you're making that first progress report?
I just feel that students respond better to positive, constructive criticism. And I know that for my students who are more, because I have a variety of students. I have AP students. I have students that are in, more of like a skills class. And for those students, I try to talk to each one individually during a classroom setting to give them more direct feedback, about how I feel about their performance. But I think initially it works to your advantage to be more positive so that the student really wants to live up to that expectation. That's how now, if it still continues that you just see a regression in their effort, in their behavior, then you have to, take a different step. But I think initially it works to your advantage to be more positive.
Okay, so you can show positivity, but do you, I guess what I'm asking is, do you pull the punches so much that they don't really get the message that they need to get? Because if you talk about how the work is satisfactory or things are going fine for now, it could reinforce bad habits. So I guess I'm coming back to that point. Like, how much benefit of the doubt do you offer a student? How much do you share in terms of what your expectations are? How much do you wait to see if they could still provide or grow with you? I mean, obviously they're going to continue to hopefully grow with you throughout the year, but in terms of making it concrete, because the other side of it is, if a student's not doing well, we start with the first progress report. You do want to get into some type of CYA to some degree, because you want to at least be able to say to a parent, these are things that I have noticed early on and that I want to address. And so if you just completely ignore it because you want to remain too positive, then if it turns out that the student, let's say, doesn't pass the class at the end of the marking period, you haven't shown the parent enough, because they'll come back to you and say, well, we had a progress report 5 weeks ago. Why didn't you make any mention of this then?
Well, I just think every student is different. So if you're talking about the student whose parents expect them to have very high grades, who are not performing and they're really more in the 80s and high 80s, then yes, if you notice that they're not working up to an advanced level, you have to come down a little bit harder. But then what about the student who's the more at-risk student, who really has struggled, and you can see from the transcript that this is a student that is borderline passing sometimes? Those students, I don't know if burying them, well, I don't want to use that word, but I don't know.
I wasn't advocating that.
No, I know. That's why I took that back. But I don't know if coming down hard early is going to really inspire them, because they don't have a track record of having a lot of success in school. So that is all about building up confidence. I mean, the way I ran my class for this first month, the one that's more geared toward skills. I try not to say it's a Regents prep class, but the reality is that these are students who are trying to get through the Regents.
Right.
And I tried to create an atmosphere in the first 3 or 4 weeks where kids felt comfortable, where they felt that they could ask questions, where they felt that it was okay to make mistakes. So I wanted everything to be positive. I wanted them to really enjoy coming to class. I wanted them to understand that learning can be fun and how it relates. And a lot of the kids got it. But I did have some kids who were curious saying, well, when are we going to take a practice Regents, or when are we? But I also am happy that they felt comfortable to say that, and then I tried to explain to them what my practice was. But I think every
Right.
kid's different.
But what you're talking about is creating a positive environment in your classroom, which, of course, I would agree is exactly what you want to do. An environment in which students can take risks and students can feel like they can fail in that risk taking and still be supported and then given a hand to rise back up. That's the kind of positive environment that you want to offer them. That's great. What I'm talking about is getting down to the nitty gritty, because you're going to basically go on record by giving your assessment of a student's performance at a given point in time. And, that matters to many parents, and they will evaluate their students' performance based on what you put on that progress report, in addition to the phone call, in addition to the conversation. And I agree with you that you definitely want to go there as well. But how much of the bare bones reality or truth do you offer up in this first progress report,
Okay.
if any
All
at
right.
all?
So we're now going back 3 times, and obviously this is a disagreement. Okay, we are now in the middle of a fight. All right, and I'm going to make this I'm going to make it very, very clear. I am
Okay,
a
thank you.
teacher. You are an administrator. As a teacher, I handle my own classes. That's the bottom line. I don't have those problems. I handle my students. I make sure I communicate with parents when need be, and I take care of their progress, and I evaluate them the way I want. You're looking at it from a broader picture. You're looking
Right.
at it from taking, as an administrator, I mean, you could speak for yourself, but we're going back and forth here with the same thing, and you're looking to change my mind, and you're not going to do it. I
No. What
handle
if I
this.
ask? What if I ask it again?
Yeah, because you've only asked 3 times.
Usually 4 times.
I have for 22 years handled my classes, and for 22 years I think I've done pretty well with it, and not encountered the problems that you're talking about. Doesn't mean that
Okay.
those problems don't exist. I respect
Fair enough.
that. Yeah.
Fair enough. No,
No,
I
but
agree.
but it's a good point. It is a good point, because that's, look at how you introduce our podcast, a view of education inside and out of the classroom. I'm inside the classroom. You're only inside when somebody, invites you in to do a guest lecture or a guest lesson. But it is a different role. There's no question about it.
Right. I guess what I would, if anyone's listening and looking for tips or advice or anything of that nature, one of the things that I've come across, and I would caution people to guard against, is if you just don't give enough feedback, whether it be through accurate feedback, through the progress report, through the report card, through the phone conversation, through whatever it is that and it should be really a combination of all those things. Because if it doesn't give a true sense of how a student's doing, if that progress is not where one would hope, it can come back to haunt you or to haunt your administrator, because people will take you to task if things don't turn out well at the end. If you're too optimistic, and in the sense that it's not accurate, then you're also doing a disservice, because you're making people believe that things are perhaps better than they truly are. Not that you want to hammer anybody, not that you want to discourage anyone through a progress report or anything else. I'm not saying that. But you want to at least find the words that offer people the optimism that you're talking about, the positivity that you're talking about, but yet still give them a true sense of a student's progress. Because otherwise you're just painting a very, very rosy picture when it may not be the case, because you want it to be optimistic or feel positive, or you want it to be the case, And that could set a parent up for a shock later on, and those never go well.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, as I'm listening to you, I wonder if we would be better off with a three marking period schedule instead of four. Because I think a lot of teachers also feel that that first progress report, especially for us in the Northeast this year with all the holidays, there was very little time
Hmm.
to make. I mean, progress report window opened, and there were teachers that didn't still know all the student names, and we had a
That's
long
a very
window
fair
for
point.
that. But maybe we need to do a three marking period system, which has
Hmm.
more time in the marking period and might allow for more of that feedback after 6 or 7 weeks
Hmm.
as opposed to 3 or 4.
And I know there are schools that that work on a trimester.
Oh,
I
do they?
wonder if those benefits are really pronounced, or if it doesn't make that much of a difference. But I think that's a very fair point.
And this whole discussion, again, we're experienced people, but for the new teachers, it's overwhelming. There's no question about it. This is, you're trying to figure out how to teach the curriculum, and you're trying to handle all the paperwork and the computers, and now you got to make judgments on all of your students and what's the ramifications going to be on this one progress report that you make.
That's right, and it does. And nowadays with electronic report cards that I'm assuming many of districts, if not all the districts, have adopted, you have a choice, a menu of comments that you can make, and sometimes it's hard to find the comment that exactly encapsulates what you want to say,
Right.
and that also can create or misconstrue the message, and so that makes it even more difficult, especially if you're a young teacher and you're just starting out. But another part of this, and I guess maybe it shows up a little bit more heavily on my side, but you certainly can experience it as well in the classroom. When we get to that first progress report period and that first report card period, I notice that the discipline or the disciplinary problems start to increase. I don't know if you've experienced that in your own classrooms with your own students. I mean, you don't really have too much in the way of classroom management issues, but have you seen that or experienced that with your colleagues?
I think in general that I would agree with that. The first couple of weeks is more of the honeymoon, just in terms of the way school, you know, the transition for how it takes
Right.
place. So yeah, I would see that. I'm not really sure how you change that though. I mean,
No, I don't know if you
yeah,
can necessarily change it,
yeah,
but it's definitely something to look out for, because I've always believed that those first few weeks, the student who hasn't had academic success or the level of success that he would have hoped in the past, he's not catching any heat at home because there's no bad report card to be held
right,
over his head.
right,
But as soon as that first report card comes out, or that first progress report, and if it's not good, or if it's not an improvement, then you can almost hear the conversation at home. It's like, here we go again, and they're immediately transported back to a time and a place where they were failures, or where they weren't looked up to by their parents, or they didn't make their parents proud, and all the stress and the anguish that comes from that, and those feelings start to surface. And when they start to surface, we all know that young people need to find outlets for those things, and they usually find that through misbehaviors.
yeah. No, that's a very good point. Very good point.
So we're not arguing on that one.
That one we're not arguing
All right, so then I don't have to ask it again.
on.
I got the answer that I wanted.
There you go.
Yeah, that was a technique my dad used to use, by the way. He'd ask a question, and then if he didn't like the answer, he'd ask it again. And then, at some point, it only took me about 25 years to figure out the technique.
Yeah.
But
Well, I'm sorry. I'm not arguing with you for, I do agree with what you said, but I also have a PSE and G truck behind my house right now, and I'm a little concerned. So I don't know
are
what
they
this is.
walking or are they running?
I
And
don't know what this is.
are they wearing like the hazmat gear, or are they just wearing a baseball cap?
Well, my computer is still working and the lights are still on, so that's a good sign. But I'm just not sure why
So it's
they're
not
here.
complete Armageddon
Yes, not
or
yet.
apocalypse just yet.
It's just
All right.
just a little bit of fear.
So, Nick, before you have a gas leak and you have to run with the dogs under your arms to safety, let's wrap things up. So, if you would like to follow us On the web, you can find us at stateofedpodcast.com. If you have a question, you can ask at stateofedpodcast.com. You could also find us in the iTunes store under the podcast section. You could also follow us on Twitter at SOE Podcast. And that wraps up our show. So thank you very much. We wish Arne Duncan a very successful and long, happy, healthy retirement, if in fact that's what he's doing. And I guess we wish John King the best of luck for all of our sakes.
Absolutely.
All right, have a good one, Nick.
Take care.